It was just before 11 a.m. on a sunny Saturday morning in May. The white Chrysler LeBaron rolled slowly into the driveway of a quiet home in Wellington, Florida. From the passenger side, a figure stepped out. They had a bright orange wig, a painted-on smile, 2 white gloves gripping 2 cheerful balloons, along with a basket of flowers. It was a clown. Inside the home, 20-year-old Joe Aarons was eating breakfast with friends. They heard the doorbell ring. His mother stood up to answer it, and from the living room, Joe watched on as she opened the door and smiled. Her voice was light. "Oh, how pretty." And then, a deafening sound. The clown had raised a weapon, and without a word, the fun figure turned, walking calmly back to the waiting car, which then drove off without speeding. It left behind a woman laying in the doorway, and a mystery that no one could explain. This clown's mask would take decades to lift. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. So if all of that sounds like your kind of thing, then make sure you join the Dark Case family now by hitting subscribe and turning all notifications on. And now for today's silly little question. If you had to be haunted by a ghost of anyone from history, who would you pick and why? Let me know down in the comments. All of your support over on Patreon, as well as right here on YouTube via channel memberships, are so appreciated, and I really can't thank you all enough. However, thank you so much. But now, on with the video. Wellington, Florida was the kind of place where nothing really happened. A tidy suburb of Palm Beach County, known for equestrian events, airplane hobbyists, and a comfortable upper-middle-class quiet. But on May the 26th, 1990, that illusion was shattered. And it was shattered in the most surreal way imaginable. Neighbours later described hearing a loud bang. Others remembered the sirens screaming down Aero Club Drive. And inside the Warren family home, chaos had erupted. 40-year-old Marlene Warren was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. She would survive for 2 days before her time on this earth would draw to a close. In the immediate aftermath, investigators swarmed her property. The scene was disturbing in its contrast. There was childlike cheer in the form of red and white balloons, a pastel-coloured flower basket, and the red staining on the front doorstep. A single shot had been fired. No words had been spoken. Nothing had been taken. The shooter had vanished, clown costume and all, leaving behind no obvious trail. The witnesses, son Joe Aarons and his friends, were shaken but were consistent in their stories. A person in a full clown costume, or disguise, had handed Marlene Warren the gifts, then pulled out a weapon and fired point blank. Then they simply walked away. It felt like something out of a dream, or a nightmare. No one had seen the attack coming, and no one could imagine just who would want this woman gone. The details were almost too strange to believe. The clown's outfit wasn't exactly theatrical, but it was just enough to be deeply unsettling. Orange synthetic hair, a red nose, white gloves and heavy face paint. But what struck Joe more than the makeup were the eyes. They were brown and calm, not angry nor wild, just intensely focused on the task at hand. He said later that he would never forget them. Also strange was the fact that the clown didn't run. They didn't stumble or panic on the way out. They simply turned around slowly, walked back to the Chrysler without a word, and then pulled away from the house like they'd just finished a simple delivery. The car had no license plate and no identifying features, and there was nothing left behind except for the balloons and the flowers. One of the balloons read, "You're the greatest." The other showed a cartoon of Snow White. Police canvassed the neighbourhood, but nobody had seen the car arrive, and by the time they set up roadblocks, the LeBaron was long gone. Witness statements were taken, photos of the crime scene were logged, but after the ambulance left, and after the media backed off, detectives were left with a chilling question. Just who would commit a murder in broad daylight and dressed as a clown? And why? If it was personal, it didn't show. If it was purely random, they couldn't make sense of it. There was no forced entry, no sign of robbery. There were no notes, calls, or threats. So why Marlene Warren? By all accounts, this woman didn't have enemies. She was a businesswoman, a mother, and a quiet presence in her community. It felt, at first, like someone had plucked this crime out of thin air and then dropped it on a random house in suburbia. But the clues, scattered, bizarre and incomplete, had to start somewhere. So police started with the Chrysler LeBaron. 4 days after the murder, police found it, a white Chrysler LeBaron, matching the exact description given by witnesses. It was located abandoned in a Winn-Dixie parking lot, just a few miles away from the Warren home. It had been wiped down, but not well. Inside, investigators collected what they called trace evidence. There were a few strands of human hair, along with several bright orange synthetic fibers, possibly from a costume wig. However, there was no weapon and there was no clown suit. But something about the vehicle itself did raise suspicions. This car had been reported stolen weeks earlier, but not in the usual way. It turns out that the Chrysler had last been in the hands of two confused renters, who tried to return it after just hours to a Payless rental agency. When they couldn't find any staff, they called a number from the Yellow Pages, a number that they believed belonged to the company. A man on the line told them to just leave the keys inside and park it out front. The next morning though, the car was gone. When they tried calling again, the same man claimed that he had no idea what they were talking about. It would later emerge that the number that they dialed didn't actually belong to a Payless at all. It belonged to Bargain Motors, a used car lot that had cleverly placed a deceptive Yellow Pages ad that was under the Payless listing. At the time, this just seemed like a minor case of shady advertising practices. But in the context of a murder involving a stolen car, it was enough to make investigators curious. They began looking into the people associated with Bargain Motors. This included the man who ran it and the woman who worked repossessions for him. As investigators combed through Marlene Warren's life, they found almost nothing. There were no known disputes, no known threats. They could locate no bitter exes, no shady business partners, nor angry clients. By all appearances, she was well liked and drama-free. She helped to manage real estate, she handled rental paperwork, and she lived quietly in Wellington's upscale aero club community. She and her husband had been together for nearly 20 years. They owned several properties, and she was known for keeping meticulous records. So how does a woman like that end up being murdered by a costumed stranger in the middle of the morning? Detectives still weren't sure. They looked harder still at the getaway car. The dealership's connection to Bargain Motors was suspicious, but it was not illegal. And even if the Chrysler had been funneled into the killer's hands by someone associated with the dealership, this didn't prove motive. It didn't prove much at all. And then came a break. Two clerks at a local costume shop came forward. They said a woman had rushed in just before closing, just 2 nights before the shooting. She was in a hurry and was very specific. She wanted a clown costume, orange wig, white gloves, a red nose, and makeup to cover her face completely. She did, however, turn down the oversized shoes. The woman paid in cash and then left. One of the clerks would later pick her out of a photo lineup, but the other though said that they weren't sure. And still, this wasn't enough. There was no weapon, no direct eyewitnesses to the shooter's identity, no DNA. So the story drifted from the headlines to the archives of the cold cases. Months turned into years, and the only thing that remained certain was that a clown had pulled off an almost perfect crime. Son Joe Aarons was just 20 years old when he watched his mother collapse in the doorway of their home. He stayed with her until the ambulance arrived. He rode in the car behind it. He waited in the hospital. And 2 days later, he sat by her bedside when she passed. For decades, Joe's life was marked by what he saw that morning. The noise, the eyes, the surreal image of his mother smiling at balloons, just seconds before her life was snuffed out. He would later say, though, that the worst part of all of this was the lack of answers. There was no one to blame. There was no face to point at, no trial to attend. So he was left stuck in the moment. Marlene's family held on to fragments and memories. They remembered her voice, her calm, her sense of humour, and they remembered the last thing that she reportedly told her mother. This was just weeks before her time was ended. "If anything happens to me, you know who did it." But even that cryptic warning seemed to lead nowhere. Years passed, the evidence just gathered dust, witnesses moved away, some passed on. Marlene's name started to fade from public memory, until that is, 2014. That year, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office received a federal grant to reinvestigate cold cases using newly available DNA technology, and one of those files flagged for review, the killer clown case. It had now been 24 years since the crime, but the hair, the fibres, the balloon strings, all of it had been preserved. And when scientists tested those fibres with 21st century tools, they got a name. And this was a name that the Sheriff's Department had once considered, but they'd never been able to prove. The hair found in the Chrysalilla Barren was brown, it was long, female, and it was from a human. Back in 1990, that kind of evidence could only really be visually compared, not scientifically matched. But now, mitochondrial DNA testing allowed investigators to draw clear genetic links. The hair matched a woman who'd once worked for Michael Warren, Marlene's husband. Her name was Sheila Keen, and the business in question was Bargain Cars. Sheila had been interviewed briefly in the original investigation. At the time, she claimed she was out looking for cars to repossess. However, she couldn't confirm where she was during the window of the murder. She denied knowing anything about the clown costume, even though one clerk identified her. Still, police had nothing to hold her on, until now. Not only did the DNA evidence bring her back into focus, detectives also confirmed something else. Sheila Keen hadn't just worked with Michael Warren back then, she was living with him now, and they were in fact married. The two of them had tied the knot in 2002, 12 years after Marlene Warren's murder. They were living in a remote part of Southwest Virginia, running a burger stand called the Purple Cow. Neighbours described them as quiet, friendly, and deeply private. But behind the smiles and deep-fried milkshakes, a question lingered. Had Sheila Keen once worn that clown costume? Had the couple waited out justice for nearly 3 decades? In September of 2017, deputies from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office travelled to Abingdon, Virginia. They located Sheila, and they arrested her. Sheila did not resist. She waived extradition back to Florida, and for the first time in 27 years, Marlene Warren's family saw a chance at justice. But that didn't mean the case was just over. In fact, things were about to get more complicated than ever.
Well, I'm here on the main street of Abington. It's a historic, quaint town where this story of one of their own charged with a heinous crime from decades ago continues to be front page news. In Palm Beach County, she's called Sheila Keen-Warren, but here she's Debbie, and in her neighborhood 15 minutes away from here, people are talking, but they don't really know what to say. A beautiful neighborhood, nice, friendly people all around.
I just felt so welcome in their home, and them in ours too.
Just about everyone in the Heron Point neighborhood near Abingdon, Virginia, believed Debbie and Michael Warren belonged.
We have wonderful neighbors here, and they were, fit right in.
This is the community where the couple has been living. It's a secluded, upscale neighborhood nestled in the mountains. You can see the house is right down here where there's just a picturesque view of rolling hills and a lake in the back. This is a stark contrast to where Sheila Keen-Warren is now, in a jail cell. Trying to picture their friend Debbie as a woman who would dress as a clown, then shoot her now husband's wife in the face 27 years ago is hard to figure.
She would be the last person on earth I would ever suspect. She's just
so loving.
Up until recently, Blevins told me the Warrens spent 6 days a week at the small drive-through restaurant they once owned in nearby Kingsport, Tennessee. It's called the Purple Cow.
Very hard workers, and we would only see them on Sundays.
This summer, Blevins explained the couple retired, spending more time at home, becoming even better friends and neighbors.
Right now, if I didn't have anything to do, I'd get in my golf cart and go down and see what Debbie and Mike were up to, and maybe they're at the boat dock or working in their yard.
But now, the woman they know as Debbie is preparing to answer first-degree murder charges and could face the death penalty.
I felt shaken, very, very shocked.
And when I stopped by the Warrens' house this morning, a woman answered the door, saying Michael Warren wasn't home either. Is Michael Warren, is he home?
No, he isn't.
Okay. You're just watching the house. Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
He's not doing well. He's very, very distraught. When we talked on the phone, he said, "You know, Brooke, she did not do this." And I said, "I believe you, and I love you both, no matter what."
Sheila Keen-Warren was 54 years old at the time of her arrest. She'd gone by different names over the years, Debbie Warren, Sheila Keen, and she'd left Florida quietly and built a new life far from where it all began. A new marriage, a new town, a new business. But investigators weren't just looking at the past anymore. Now they were building a present-day case. A case with new witnesses, updated forensics, and one eye on conviction. There were problems though. Some of the evidence had degraded over time. Some witnesses had now passed away, and others couldn't remember what they saw clearly in 1990. And some of the forensic results, particularly one DNA sample, showed traits found in as many as 1 in 20 women. The defense would pounce on that. They accused prosecutors of pursuing a shaky case, just to close a high-profile cold file. They said Sheila had been targeted because she was the only viable suspect left. And they pointed out something strange. At least 40 other clown sightings had been documented in the days surrounding the murder. So could another clown have done this? Was this just a case of clown misidentification? I guess stranger things have happened.
The killer clown case hit the tight-knit community of Wellington in 1990. Detectives believe Sheila Keen-Warren disguised herself in a full-face clown costume and shot Marlene Warren at point-blank range. Keen-Warren later married the victim's husband, Michael Warren.
Sheila Warren Keen.
Contact 5 has been following this case since Sheila Keen-Warren was arrested in 2017. Warren is also accused of falsifying paperwork so taxpayers would pay for her high-profile defense attorney. But prosecutors presented a list of assets tied to Keen-Warren and her husband, including a $500,000 home in Virginia and more than $300,000 in cash. The killer clown trial now set to play out in court in June 2020.
We're looking forward to it. It's time to get this case tried, and I don't expect there'll be any delays.
Both sides agreed on a new trial date because evidence of the brutal murder is in archaic formats, and witnesses, some of whom are already dead, are difficult to track down.
In court filings, the defense began to press for delays. They cited lost evidence, inaccessible witnesses, and questionable prosecutorial conduct. The case stalled, and then stalled again, and then again. In total, the trial would be delayed 7 times.
All rise. Court is now in session.
Sheila Keen-Warren was escorted into a Palm Beach County 10th floor courtroom for Thursday afternoon's hearing. Her attorneys asked for a continuance and wanted more time to prepare for the trial. They claim state prosecutors did not release some of their requested discovery evidence, including some of the evidence linked to a reported confession from this man, Edward Barr. The state prosecutor told the judge he didn't believe he violated any Florida statutes and apologized.
I apologize for any oversight. I am doing my very best. There is a lot of information in this case, but I've done nothing with any type of intent.
Keen-Warren's attorney says it was intentional.
They know when they give us information and when they don't. There's no accident here. This was an intentional withholding of evidence, and that's why we felt like we had to come to court.
Years passed once more, and then quietly, almost anticlimactically, Sheila Keen-Warren made a shocking decision, one that took even her own legal team by surprise. The plea deal came just weeks before the long-awaited trial. In April of 2023, after more than 5 years in pre-trial detention, Sheila Keen-Warren pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She didn't speak much in court. When asked if she agreed with the prosecutor's version of events, she simply said, "Yes, sir." Her attorney told reporters outside the courtroom that she did still maintain her innocence, but she'd taken a plea deal to avoid the risk of spending the rest of her life in prison. It was only after the plea deal was entered that the full picture of what had happened began to emerge. Back in 1990, Sheila had been working repossessions for Bargain Motors. This was Michael Warren's dealership. Rumours of an affair had swirled even then. However, both parties denied it. Detectives later heard from witnesses who claimed that the two of them were seen kissing in the office, that they took long lunches together, that they even spent nights together, and after Marlene's murder, Michael, whose assets had been deeply entangled with his wife's, never faced any charges. Still though, locally, it raised eyebrows. And then in 2002, 12 years after Marlene's passing, Michael Warren married the woman long suspected of killing his wife. To those close to the investigation, this felt like confirmation, a kind of twisted symmetry, and to Marlene Warren's son Joe, the man who had watched that clown calmly walk away, it was a gut punch. His stepfather had moved on, he had remarried, he had found happiness, and he had done all of this with the woman that Joe had suspected could be the killer. It didn't matter what the defense argued. Joe had looked that clown in the eyes, and he said that he would never forget them. Following the plea deal, the sentence was 12 years, but under Florida law, Sheila Keen-Warren received credit for time served, including the years that she spent behind bars awaiting trial. She also earned early release for good behaviour. And are you ready to hear the most insane thing I've ever told you? In total, she served just 18 months in state prison. Following her 2023 guilty plea, she was released in November 2024.
She was facing life in prison, and at one point the death penalty was on the table. Her lawyer telling me that while the decision was hard because she has always maintained her innocence in this murder, that faced with possible life in prison versus walking out of jail in 10 months, she took the obvious choice, he says. And why it's 10 months is because of the game time and also this almost 6 years that she's already spent in jail waiting for this much delayed and canceled trial to finally start.
Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Arenberg released a blunt statement. Sheila Keen-Warren will always be an admitted convicted murderer and will wear that stain for every day for the rest of her life. Her attorney, on the other hand, expressed relief, kind of distastefully. "We are absolutely thrilled that Ms. Keen-Warren has been released and is returning to her family," he said, adding, "As we stated from the beginning, she did not commit this crime." But for Marlene's son, there was no real relief, no true satisfaction, just an ache that still hadn't gone away. "I was there," Joe said. "I saw her eyes." And despite the delays, the doubts, and the shortened sentence, he finally got to say one thing to his mother's memory. "We got truth. We got closure."
From her home in Las Vegas, 87-year-old Shirley Twing got the call Tuesday she had been waiting for 27 years.
Kind of sigh of relief, and it kind of choked me up a bit, thinking about, because sometimes I feel like crying when I'm talking about it. Thank you. That's all I can say. Well, I had faith that they never gave up, because if they got it in their mind to do so, eventually it works out for them and me.
For over 30 years, the story of the killer clown haunted Florida headlines. A woman murdered at her front door, a balloon that said, "You're the greatest," a suspect who vanished for decades, only to return wearing a wedding ring with the victim's husband. In the end, the case didn't end with a dramatic trial or a televised verdict. It ended strangely quietly, with a plea, and with an insanely quick release. Some believe that Sheila was wrongly convicted that she was forced into a corner by an aging case and a tired legal system. Others believe that she escaped justice entirely. But one way or another, this case is closed. 18 months. Crazy. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.